a lot of information in about 30 minutes. Some stuff like the fellow I was talking, Stivers and the other was talking about insurance and what's not covered, that takes decades. There's a lot of depth in that. So we're not going to be able to go that deep by any means. But we're going to be going pretty quick to try to get as much as we can. So what we're going to talk about tonight is regarding the commercial deal, buying commercial real estate. We're going to have some slides that will help us through with that. So the first thing you should consider is location. It has to work for you geographically. All of this, everything we're going to talk about tonight is you being empowered with knowledge. Knowledge is power. If you are aware of most of the things we're talking about, you'll be in good shape. If you trust someone else to do it, well, there's a lot of guys that have a bridge to sell you. So the first thing you should look at when you're purchasing any real estate is the geographic location. If you live in Central Jersey, you certainly don't want to go down to Florida. You've got to look at your property. You have to be able to manage it. You have to go, even if you're hiring a manager, you still need to go look and see what's going on. You need to analyze the property financially. You want to underwrite it. You want to make sure what the return is going to be. You want to physically inspect the property. Touch the bricks, kick the tires, look for things. And we're going to go over all these things in more detail this evening. You want to know how to negotiate. You're going to negotiate from a power of strength, which is knowledge. You want to review the documents. You want to make sure that you can manage this asset after you close it. After you close real estate for asset accumulation, hedging against inflation. Go to the next slide, please. Cash flow, supplemental income. Are you going to manage the property itself? You're going to hire a third-party manager. If it's self-managed, you should do a careful analysis if you can do the same job that a professional manager can do. If you look at this next slide, it shows the commercial real estate since 1978 to 2010. One line is commercial real estate, the other line is consumer price index. Except for two flips down, you can see what a solid investment real estate has been since 1978. Anyone that has been in the real estate market, the Washington real estate market, for that many years knows what that value is. So obviously, just as a hedge against inflation, real estate is a superb investment. If you buy right, you'll have correct cash flow, and you'll do well with that financially. I'd like to turn it over to Chris to talk about the financial analysis.
Good evening, everyone. So I just wanted to quickly go over some financial analysis because this is something I deal with on a day-to-day basis, and I come across a lot of scenarios where sellers or brokers or whoever it may be are not really showing the property in its correct investment value. And this is really the first part to an investment property. It's all about dollars and cents. We're all here to make money, and when we're first analyzing a property, we're looking at it from its financial performance. On the left, I have something that I see very often, which is a multiple listing sheet trying to sell an investment property. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a series of numbers attached to expenses. And you'll see that a lot of those expenses are empty. Things like the superintendent, management, maintenance, utilities, and estimated vacancy. I see these things as empty. I see this a lot. It's important to really understand how the property is actually going to function and perform if you want it to last and maintain it in your portfolio. On the right-hand side, you'll see that we have a sheet that's a little bit more in depth, and you're probably a little bit more on par with the banks are going to look to underwrite. So if you underwrite the property on the right-hand side, you're probably going to be on par with the bank, and it's probably going to underwrite properly. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there's nothing for maintenance or management. Well, I guess that they're expecting the landlord or whoever's purchasing the property to be able to shovel the snow, maintain the books, and do all the other things that it takes to manage a property on a day-to-day basis. At the very minimum, your time is worth something. So even if you're not hiring a professional management company, even if you don't have maintenance that many in this room see on a day-to-day basis, there needs to be a factor in there because your time is worth something. If you have to go to the building and pick up the rent, if you have to shovel the snow, if you have to deal with the tenants, you need to allocate something for that in terms of your time. Okay? Estimated vacancy. I also see something not allocated for vacancy. In Hudson County and in northern New Jersey, it's very common that vacancy rate is very low. However, even if you're going to be having somebody ready to move into the apartment right away, you still have to paint the apartment, you still have to clean it up. Just before us, the attorneys were talking about eviction. This takes time, this takes money, so there needs to be a factor in there to underwrite this properly. We usually use a 5% for management, we use 5% for maintenance, and we use 2.5% for vacancy. These are close, they're not the end all. This is not what every bank is going to use exactly, but it's pretty close, and it's going to get you to where you can understand that the property is going to monetarily function properly. This is not what every bank is going to use exactly, but it's pretty close, and it's going to get you to where you can understand that the property is going to monetarily function properly. Once you underwrite a property properly, and you understand its investment performance, you're able to go and look at the property and look at it and see how it's running on a physical perspective. I'll pass it off to James. He's going to go over some things to look for physical.
Good evening, everybody. I'm James. So after you decide the property is financially feasible for you to purchase, you're going to want to obviously go and see what you're purchasing, see what you're looking at. Some of the things we're going to go over are more obvious than not, but the first thing you want to do is, when you pull up to the property, what are you observing? Are there several people outside of the building hanging out on the stoop? That's going to allude to a certain type of building community. Or is everything in great shape and, you know, that element is not there? You want to inspect the pointing, the lintels of the windows, the metal above the windows. Is it rusting or is it in good shape? This is going to be a guide for you on what the condition of the building is. This is just general curb appeal, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. As you approach the front door, is the building secure? Is the front door locked? In many situations, it may not be. That's a telltale sign that there's obviously issues at the building. Common sense. As you enter the building, what are the condition of the hallways? Are fire extinguishers in place? Is there a green card hanging in the foyer? Do the apartment numbers, or are there numbers on the apartment doors? You're going to base the condition, the overall maintenance of the building off of this. If there are no numbers on the doors, and if there are other fire extinguishers, and there's no green card, that's an indication that there's something wrong. How are the hallways kept? Are they clean? Is the superintendent doing his job? Another indicator of what the overall maintenance of the property is. And if you think that, you know, a poorly maintained property doesn't cause problems in the future, you're kidding yourself. It will create problems once you own the asset down the road. Because if they're not taking care of the cleaning, then they're not handling larger items, they're not taking preventative maintenance measures. The roof. What type of roofing material is it? Is it a rubber roof? Is it a tar roof? Is it cracked? You want to understand the condition of the roof, the last time it was put down, how many roof layers may be on that roof. Are the deck drains, do the roof drains have covers on them? If they don't have covers, then any type of debris can be going into the building, into the drainage system. The skylight, that's probably above the stairwell, or the stairwell shaft that pops out above the roof. That's brick and mortar. What's the condition of the pointing? Poorly pointed areas will create problems for you, and water intrusion will occur. As you're in the building, you're going to want to go inside some units. Hopefully you have the ability to do that. What type of people are living there? Is it more of a transient building, or does it seem like people are staying there for a long time? If there are air mattresses all over the apartment, odds are they're not staying there for a long time. Or maybe they just have bed bug treatment. Either way, that should throw up a red flag for you. Okay? You can ask the tenants. You know, and any owner here is probably saying to themselves, you can ask the tenants 10 questions, 8 of them are going to be exaggerated, 2 of them may be on point. You're going to want to ask them anyway, because the tenants of the building will be able to give you a good idea of what does the owner do? Is the owner responsive to problems? And does he take care of the issues of the building when they arise? As you make your way down into the basement, which is arguably the most expensive room in the building, what are the condition of the utilities? When was the last time the boiler was inspected? There's more than likely going to be plumbing tags on those boilers or hot water heaters. Take a look to see when they were inspected last. Take a look to see when they were installed or what work was done. That will be a good indicator, again, of preventative maintenance and just overall care of the building. Just a couple of photos of what basement should look like, not a whole bunch of stuff all over the place and tenants storing items in the basement. If tenants are storing items in the basement, you have a problem. The owner does not have control of what's going on. Unless you're allowing them to and you're collecting rent off that. The general basement area, if the ceiling is exposed, you'll have the ability to take a look at the structure as well. Are the joists in good condition? Is there any evidence of wood-eating insects or anything like that that might be affecting the structure? You can also look for signs of standing water. That's a big problem. If certain areas of the basement are significantly dirtier than others, or there's an accumulation of dirt or soot, there's a good chance that there's a standing water problem in the basement. It's not a bad idea to bring an inspector with you, so you have a professional report. It may help in negotiation with the seller, and it will also give you the opportunity to plan in the future because they'll be able to identify things that are wrong now or may become an issue down the road. That's a broad strokes of what you should be looking for when you're inspecting the building with your inspector or with your broker. And I'm going to kick it back to Mike.
I kind of feel like we're going at a really fast pace and we might be skipping over something. I hope that that's not the case. I hope you're actually getting some of what we're talking about. The whole thing is about having knowledge and authority, understanding what it is you're looking at. If you're going to buy a piece of real estate, you need to understand the financial return, how to calculate cap rates, what per unit costs are or draw costs, what comparable sales are, condition of the building. All of these things are going to input into your knowledge base. It's going to help you understand the value. If you know properties are selling for $125,000 a door and an 8 cap rate, but you're paying $75,000 a door and a 6 cap rate, there may be value in it if you understand how to unlock that. If you don't, then maybe you shouldn't buy that property. Maybe you'll find out after the fact that you overpaid or you bought something that you just did not know how to unlock the value. A lot of people talk about value return, unlocking an equity in a property, something that maybe the rents have not been increased in 10 years. So there's a 15% potential for that rent to go up. Well, if the rent hasn't been registered in that 15-year period, you're probably not going to be able to raise that rent to where you think you may. So the value that you think you're going to buy or be able to get in 2 years of return, you may not actually have. So what we're really preaching here tonight is knowledge. Hire an expert. Your attorney will be key. Hire an expert to do an inspection on a property. Know what you should be looking for. If you're not a mechanical person and you don't understand it, that's what you're going to rely on your inspector for. If you're going to get a mortgage, and most people will be buying a property with a mortgage, your bank is going to underwrite it. You should learn and understand how to do basic underwriting for that property before you ever get there. If you're buying a property and you think it has a certain return, when we showed you some setup sheets earlier tonight where it didn't have a number of expenses, superintendent, maintenance and repairs, all of those items, the bank is going to underwrite that. If you don't discover that for 6 weeks into the deal, and you spent money on inspections, and you spent money on attorneys, you just threw it away because the bank is probably not going to underwrite that deal. It's not going to fund it. So knowledge is power. I must have said that 5 or 6 times in this last standing. Knowledge is power. The more you look at, the better you'll get.
Can you explain how capitalization rates factor into an acquisition?
We're going to be doing questions after Bruce.
That was Bruce Ruby asking a question, and I believe he said what we asked if we could have a question period after the talk.
I never did good in school.
I couldn't resist.
All right, so real quick, I just want to discuss you as well, because this is something that comes up after you've analyzed the property financially, after you've looked at the property, now you're in due diligence, and you're sort of doing your exploratory and making sure that everything is as it was advertised and represented. So we have a brief list here of some things that some people always ask for, but once in a while I get a question, people are not looking for these things. So the green card. Green card, state has jurisdiction over multi-family properties that we sell. They come in every 5 years. Everybody in this room, for the most part, is dealing with this. And if it's 6 months to expiration, maybe some cause for concern. You probably want to physically inspect that property a little bit more than if it has just been renewed, because that means the state's going to be coming through, and the probability of them issuing fines is pretty good, because that's how they generate revenue. Certificate of occupancy, similar to a green card, but this is more under the jurisdiction of the city. In some cities, and they just want to verify that there are no open permits or open violations. Some cities just want to verify that the property is literally still there and still what it was that they have on their records. So this will change for each city that we do business with. Signed leases. So usually when I go and meet with a landlord, they want to sell a property, they give me the rent roll. And I call the city, and then I find out that the rent roll is far different than what the city is allowing that landlord to collect. Or the tenant doesn't know what the legal rent is. So it's good to have signed leases that are enforceable. It's also good to get, if you go down the list here, you'll see registered rent roll. It's also good to have that as well. If there are differences, you may want to get an estoppel certificate. This is something that's literally signed by the tenant. It's very recent, that's going to affirm that they understand what their rent is and what their contractual obligation is for the service that you're providing to them. Of course, insurance statement and quote. Some landlords will, just before they're getting ready to sell a property, get an insurance plan that's maybe a little bit less robust than they would be carrying, but they're trying to increase that net income as much as possible. So it's a good idea to get their insurance statement, but it's also a good idea to get your own quote from your own broker to make sure that you have a full understanding of what the insurance is going to cost on this building. Utilities. Again, landlords will usually try to give me 2 or 3 months of the most recent utility bills, and I strongly advise clients to get a full year run because we have seasonal changes in the Northeast, and utility bills can be drastically different throughout these months. So it's important to get at least 1 full year picture of how the property is running on the expense side. Phase 1 environmental, also very important. James had run through physically inspecting a property. Very often an established landlord can tell if there's an oil tank in the ground, or if the sidewalk has been paved over, it may not be so obvious. A lot of times I go in and the sidewalk is nice and clean, there's no film port, but if you go inside the basement and the basement wall that is on the street side, you will see that send and receive line from the existing oil tank that is buried under the ground, and which will be your liability once you own the property. So strongly suggest you very carefully look for those little items. In addition, the send and receive line can come all the way out by the boiler. So if you're looking at the boiler, look on the floor, you may see a little raised area of cement. Very often those send and receive lines are buried underneath that small little raised area, and sometimes you'll even see them peeking up right in the vicinity of the boiler. You'll see two very small lines that come out. Those are oil lines. Those are going to an oil tank. So make sure you get a phase 1 environmental. Make sure you're not purchasing a very expensive liability. I think that really brings us to post-closing management, which I am going to once again hand off to James.
Congratulations, you now own a liability. So how you manage the property from closing is going to depend on what your exposure is. The first thing you should do is go and introduce yourself to the tenants. You want to tell them where to pay the rent, who to call if there's an emergency, and what to do if there's a problem. You should also meet with the super if there is already a super in the building. If there's not, begin interviewing immediately. Whether there's one there or whether you're going to hire a new super, you want to make sure that you have an employee agreement signed with that superintendent with clear job duties. This way, you have clear expectations of them, and they understand what their job is. It makes it easier to get rid of them, and it just makes everybody's life easier when you have everything on paper. You're going to want to get maintenance contracts in place for extermination, snow removal if the superintendent's not going to be doing it, fire alarm monitoring if applicable. All these items should be addressed immediately. Any items that were presented in the inspection report to you that perhaps were not credited or were not prepared, that should be your guideline as a budget. You should use that as a guide for when you should be doing projects and when to allocate certain expenses. Basically, if you're going to be self-managing the property yourself, you can do all those things yourself. As Mike mentioned, there's a cost to that. As Chris mentioned, there's a cost to that. Your time, if you hire a professional management company, if you're entertaining the idea of hiring a professional management company, you should interview that management company, interview several management companies, visit some similar buildings that they're managing, get an idea of how they handle their properties. Because as you have a good management company, the investment that you make will become more passive. That's pretty much it. As we said, it was pretty broad strokes. Thank you everybody for coming out, and